A seat at the cabinet table brings great responsibility. But what happens when an illness threatening the life of the person closest to you turns your world upside down? I talked to James and Susie Cleverly about foreign policy, teamwork and dealing with cancer. Hello and welcome to Beth Rigby Interviews. Just 4 months ago, the now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak resigned from his position as Chancellor. At the time, the government and Boris Johnson's premiership was engulfed by allegations of sexual misconduct against the former Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher. Later in the show, we hear from Lord McDonald, a former civil servant who rocked the government by saying Mr Johnson's defence that he didn't know about the claims were untrue. But first, for James Cleverly, being the Foreign Secretary means dealing with high-pressure situations. But like many families, his has been battling with unimaginable pain. His wife, Susie, who he describes as his biggest support, found out she had breast cancer a year ago this week. We went on a special visit to the Foreign Office to hear their story. Susie and James, thank you for joining us on the show today. Now, James, you are our Foreign Secretary running one of the great offices of state for government, but we're not here to talk about foreign policy today, although I might ask you one question at the end. We're here to talk about Susie, actually, more about your wife, Susie, and about your battle with cancer. And you're looking great, and you look so well now, but it has been quite a torturous journey. So thank you for sharing your story and raising awareness for other women out there. And thank you for inviting us to the beautiful Foreign Office. But what I wanted to do, I thought what would be nice would be to start at the beginning, because you two are renowned around Westminster as being a very close couple. So let's start at the beginning. How did you both meet?
We met at university. It was my first day of my first year, and James was working behind the bar. And I just met these new friends, you know, and I was trying to impress them. I went to buy all the drinks, and James served me, and I waited a while to get my drinks. You're a bit slow, because he told everybody, don't serve her, I want to serve her. And I took all the drinks and I went off, and I didn't really pay much attention. I was just so focused on, you know, my new friends. And but you followed me, didn't you?
I did.
And came to chat to me.
Pretty cheesy chat-up line.
What was that?
I basically said, you've got the most gorgeous eyes I've ever seen in my life, right in front of her new friends on her first day at uni.
Yeah.
But she still does.
And they all kind of went, oh, and just left us to it, and that was it.
And that was it?
And that was 29 years ago.
And that was it? You started going out and that was it?
Nearly.
So this was love at first sight, James?
Yeah. I mean, Susie was and is absolutely stunning. Managed to forget my wallet on our first date, so Susie had to pay for our first date, which was... So I did my best to screw it up, but I think, no, it's, 29 years.
And 29 years and you're very much together. You have 2 sons, now adults. I think Rupert's just turned 18, your younger boy. And James, you were a minister in the Johnson administration back in 2021. Your boys were growing up, and then everything changed for you and your entire family. Susie, when did you first learn you were ill?
It's almost a year to the day, actually. A year ago on Sunday, it was the 13th of November, we were in Essex, and I just got up in the morning, went to have a shower, and I was just letting the water run and, you know, to get warm. Yeah. And I just did an almighty stretch in front of the mirror, and as I came back up from the stretch, I just noticed, just really, really, it was luck, I noticed this strange puckering on my skin underneath my breast, and I instantly knew that's not right. That's never been there before. So I went into James and said, have you seen this? Have you seen this before? And he was like, no. And we were both like, this isn't right. But it was Saturday morning. What can you do on a Saturday morning? So we just thought, let's just park it and enjoy our weekend in the constituency. And we had quite a few events on. I think there was it was a Remembrance Sunday weekend. So we had a number of things that we were going to there, and I thought, well, I'll just ring the doctors on the Monday morning. And that's what I did. And I nearly didn't. It was just James's look at me on the Monday morning. We were busy. It was what it's like in the morning with getting everybody ready, the dogs, the kids, all sorts. And James looked at me and said, don't forget to call the doctor.
Okay. And
he was so serious. And I just felt I need to, and I did, and it all happened so quickly.
And it did happen quickly. So that's November the 13th. You noticed a puckering on your breast.
Yeah.
You phoned the doctor Monday, and then your diagnosis happened quite quickly.
It was the 3rd of December, wasn't it?
Yeah, so what was the process? I mean, were you frightened, or did you just try and put it to the back of your mind and wait to see what the doctor said?
I think the day I was really frightened was the day I went to the doctor, because I knew something wasn't right.
Right, okay.
And I knew that puckering was a sign for breast cancer.
Yeah.
And I went to my GP and I told him, they were amazing. The receptionist said, why do you want to see the doctor? And I explained what I'd found. And she said, the doctor will need to see you today. The doctor will ring you between 8:30 and 12. At 8:30 on the dot, the doctor rang me and said, I need to see you today, when I explained what it was. And I said, that's fine, I can be there in 2 minutes, because we live a few houses up from the doctor's. So I whizzed round before he even started his surgery. And within seconds, he examined me, he could feel a lump, I couldn't feel a lump.
Right.
And he could see the puckering of the skin. And he said, for what I can see and what I can feel, I think you do have breast cancer, but I'm going to refer you to the breast clinic. Take somebody with you, it's probably going to be bad news. And I think that's what he said.
Yeah, it's
I don't know, because you suddenly get hit by this, oh, it's cancer. And I don't really know if those were the words, but that's what I heard and what I remember. And I just came out of there and I rang James, who was on the train into Westminster to hear. And I said, I think it's cancer. And I just burst into tears, and I think I cried most of that day, because it was a bit of a shock. And that was the time I was really, really scared.
Yeah.
But then you get used, I just got used to it. It's cancer. What can I do? I can't do anything. I've just got to do as I'm told, take the medication, and then get better.
So you were very upset. Well, James, what did you do? You're coming into work, and Susie phones with this bombshell, and you have to go and just do your day's work. I mean, it must have been...
No, it was quite weird. So we'd come back to London, because I was, going to be coming into Westminster as we often do. So I'd got on the suburban train to head into Westminster, and my plan had been Susie goes to the doctor. Hopefully, it's nothing to worry about, and I get on with my day. And Susie rang me and she said, "I've been to see the doctor. They're not happy. They think it might be cancer." And I said, "Look, I'll come home. I'll turn straight round. I'll come home." So I had to ring my private secretary at the Foreign Office to say, "Look, can you cancel my meetings because I need to go home?" And he said, "Is everything okay, Minister?" And I tried to say, "Susie might have cancer." I just couldn't get the words out. I couldn't speak. And I can talk. But I just couldn't speak. So I said, I'll text you. And I texted him. This organisation was amazing. Liz Truss was my boss at the time when she was Foreign Secretary. She's absolutely amazing. So I cancelled my meetings and went home, talked to Susie, we talked it through. I then tried to ring again to explain what was going on, and I couldn't say it. I couldn't say the word. I couldn't say the word. So for the next couple of hours, everything was done on WhatsApp, just explaining, apologising for meetings that I was cancelled. And it really hit me. I'd never felt anything like that before.
Because I was going to say, Susie, the thing was you got diagnosed very quickly, but it was an aggressive cancer, yeah?
Yeah, and 3 types of breast cancer. I didn't know you could get three types.
I didn't know. So what
No.
are they? Did you have the most aggressive type?
I'm triple positive, so it responds to my hormones, and HER2 is estrogen, progesterone, and HER2. And HER2 is, I think that's the aggressive one. And 10 years ago, there was no cure for HER2, so I'm really fortunate that I got it now. The most frightening thing was the word cancer.
Yeah.
So as soon as that was I was on board that I had cancer,
then you've just got to go through.
Just got to get on with it.
Through it, but
I wasn't scared when they told me that I had.
But James, you sort of said how you couldn't actually even verbalise what was happening to Susie and the family. You know, you've got your sons. You're a very tight family. I mean, was this the first serious trauma the family had had? I mean, was it the worst thing that had happened to you both as a couple, would you say? Or
I mean, I've always regarded myself as being lucky. And it's not that I haven't had difficulties. I mean, my mum had breast cancer. It's quite funny. It almost, you know, so mum had breast cancer. Mum passed away about 9 years ago. And, you know, so we've had difficulties in our life. I mean, like a lot of people, when we were a bit younger, you know, I got made redundant at one point, so money was tight. So we've had difficulties, but, you know, we have got a really, really supportive extended family on both my side and Susie's side. So we've always been able to get through. But this was different. It really did feel different.
And Susie, as the disease progressed, it was rough, wasn't it? Can you talk to me a little bit about that journey for you? Because your treatment became almost unbearable. It did become unbearable, didn't it, in terms of the side effects for you?
It did. I mean, don't get me wrong, people do get it far worse than I had it. But it was really tough. The first drug I was on, it hit me really hard every time I had it. I had it 4 times, and it was every 2 weeks. And I would come home, and 2 hours later, I'd be knocked out. I'd have to go straight to bed. I knew I had to go to bed, and I was quite ill with it. But I would slowly get better, and over the couple of weeks, I'd slowly kind of feel like I was climbing out of the hole.
And then you have to have the next round, though. Then you're hit again. But
exactly.
You did 4 lots of that, and then they moved you onto a different drug, didn't they?
Yeah, which was part of the plan. I was going on to another drug called docetaxel for another 4 doses every 3 weeks. But I had a reaction to that, and my face, all sorts of... I had a whole long list of side effects. But
nails.
Yeah, my nails, the reason they're painted is because they're all black and falling off. I've lost 2 of my toenails, and the sensitivity on my fingers is horrible, and my feet. But with that drug, my face ballooned, and it was covered in hives that became infected, and it was really, really quite uncomfortable, and it looked pretty awful, didn't I? And it was itchy, and it wasn't very nice. And they took me off it. I also had problems with my stomach.
And you also talked about, when we talked the other day, actually, I saw you at Party Coffee, you talked about, and my friend's having treatment at the moment, she's having the same, about the ulcers in the mouth.
Yes. That was horrific.
You couldn't even eat or drink at one point.
No, that's right. I couldn't. And it was very difficult to speak. I look back at some videos I've done, because I'm doing a video diary. And yeah, I couldn't speak. I couldn't move my tongue properly around my mouth because my mouth was so sore. And even putting a glass of water to my lips was really painful. The water going in my mouth was really painful. It was not nice.
Did you? I know you just have to go through it, don't you? Because you need to get better. But you must have felt quite low. Did you withdraw? Did you withdraw from life a bit? Did you hide away? I mean, how did you cope with that?
Well, I didn't really do a huge amount because I couldn't really do very much. But I did walk my dogs every day, and people would come and visit. I had a lot of support from family and friends. There was always somebody coming to see me, so I didn't go out a lot, but I had a lot of people coming to help me around the house, help me in the garden. People cooked for me, people would turn up with meals. The support has been absolutely incredible. Really, really incredible.
And James, for you, you're here at the Foreign Office when this is happening. You're working as a minister. Did you at any point think, I'm going to have to take some compassionate leave or even quit my job? Like, I need to... Politics is frenetic. It never stops. Yeah. The demands on you never stop. Did you think, actually, Susie needs me more than the Foreign Office needs me right now?
So I'd said to Susie... I will do whatever I need to do, and Susie's always had a veto on my political career. I've always said this can be really, really horrible. And if at any point, we had this conversation long before the cancer, I've always said, if at any point you don't want me to do this anymore, that's it, I'll stop. I'll hand in my papers and I'll stop. And so when this happened, I said, look, what do you want me to do? And Susie said, well, look, just keep working until I need you to stop working. As I say, Liz was great, and I had a conversation with Liz, and I said, look, this is the situation. I want to keep working, but at some point, and it might be at quite short notice, I might need to take some time off. And she said, look, keep working as normal until you can't work as normal, and then let me know. So she was great, and as the whips were great, the PM was great, and I suppose trying to maintain some normality in my life was quite important. But ultimately, when you went for surgery, and you did need a lot of support, getting dressed and walking and that kind of stuff, I took some time off. But Susie's, she's strong like iron. She really. I look back now. I was amazed by how little time I needed to take off and how determined you were to recover. But that period immediately for that couple of weeks after the surgery was really tough.
What happened? What happened? Tell me about this. So you had a
mastectomy, single mastectomy on the right side and reconstruction at the same time, and they took my stomach, to create the breast. But I knew that's when I'd need him, and I knew I wanted James to be with me, and I knew it would take a good couple of weeks. So that's why I just wanted you to keep going and not be. I didn't need him sitting on, worrying about me. But the surgery, was full on. It was full on, but it's all manageable. You just. I didn't really think about it too much.
Did you think though? Did you have moments where you thought, "Am I going to get through this? Am I going to get better?" Or did you always have it in your mind that you would get through it?
Oh yeah, I always thought I'd get through it. I'm quite a positive person. Yeah. I don't even think there's another option. Yeah. Maybe at the beginning I was like, "Oh, maybe this is it. This is the end of my road." But as soon as I was on, as soon as I was seeing my consultant and I was given my plan of the medication that I was going to be on, I thought, okay, yeah, there's a way out. And as I say to people, that it's like getting on a roller coaster. You just get on the ride, and you've got to go with it. Yeah. If you try and fight it, that's when you get into trouble. And I don't look to the future, not because I don't think there's going to be one for me, not at all. It's just because I just need to take each day as it comes and get through those moments.
One of the things that really struck me is that we were referred to Guy's and St Thomas's Cancer Centre, and everybody, all the various medical professionals from all the various different teams, and I lose track of how many different bits of the NHS work to do this. Every single one of them were just incredibly professional, and that professionalism was just so reassuring. And once people start explaining, this is what's happening, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to work, this is what happens next. Even though they're talking about quite scary stuff, it was incredibly reassuring. It was remarkable. It's striking how many people you find out have either had breast cancer or have someone close to them that's got breast cancer. And that was one of the things. So it's much more prevalent than I realised. And having someone you love go through it makes it real.
James, did you ever think you might lose Susie in this journey, or did you always think she'll be okay? That may be the day you found out.
Look, there have been a couple of times when I've had to think about that, and it's weird because when you're younger, you go through big chunks of your life. That's not anything you ever think about. And I hadn't thought about my own mortality, and I certainly hadn't ever really given any thought to losing Susie or what that might feel like. And then suddenly you've got to confront that. And as you say, we are close. Sorry.
And you okay? The good thing is, though, the good news is that you've had your treatment you've had your reconstruction, you've had your mastectomy, and how are you now? Because you look great.
Yeah, I feel great. I feel so much more like me. I'm still having treatment. I'm having immunotherapy now, and that'll be going on until April. And then I'll have another operation that's more reconstruction to finish off. I'm on the waiting list for that. But I feel great. I feel like me again. I feel like I can do things. I can't do everything that I used to be able to do just yet because I'm not fit enough. I haven't done anything for quite a while. But yeah, I feel like I'm more like me.
If you will indulge me with this, Susie, we've run out of time, but James, you are the Foreign Secretary and I am, with my other hat on, the political editor.
Of course.
Hopefully we can do a proper sit-down on politics and foreign policy another time, but just to ask you, because I really have to, now I'm here, just on Russia and Ukraine, we're at a phase in that war where Putin's options appear to be narrowing. The Russians are now pulling out of key areas near Kherson. Are we reaching the point now where you think Russia is losing that war?
Russia started losing this war the day their tanks rolled across the border, because it was clear that Putin expected that President Zelensky would be overthrown, that he could be replaced with some kind of puppet leader, that the Ukrainians would collapse, their morale would collapse. And what happened is that they were galvanized, the international community came together, and from that point onwards, the result was inevitable, which was that the Ukrainians would succeed, and we're now seeing that played out. There are, of course, options for Putin, and I think the best option for him is to withdraw, is to allow the Ukrainians to have their country back, and the reason why that's the best option is because it's clear the international community, the UK very much included in that, will continue to support the Ukrainians until they succeed.
And Russia is now interested in talking, isn't it? I mean,
things
yeah. And you're talking about withdrawal. Just one more thing. Does that, for you, for President Zelensky, that includes Crimea? Does it for the UK government as well?
Look, the decision about this has got to be for the Ukrainians. It's got to be for President Zelensky. You know, we will continue to support the Ukrainians until this is done. And we're absolutely not going to, and no one should dictate to the Ukrainians what the terms of any settlement should be. That will be for the Ukrainians to do, and we're going to support them.
You're 100%. I'm out of time. I'm going to ask you one cheeky final question. Okay, if you don't mind. Things have calmed down a lot around this place in Westminster. I spoke to you. Do you remember the day that Rishi Sunak was anointed Conservative Party leader? You had backed Boris Johnson up to that point, James. You and he go back a long way. You've always been a key ally to him. But now we've kind of got back to stability and the sort of that period's over. Did you regret a bit wanting to bring back the Boris Johnson era?
Well, look, as you say, I've worked with him for over a decade. And he's supported me and I've supported him. But the point is, he chose not to stand. That was his decision alone. Rishi he's already demonstrated in what has only been, let's remind ourselves, only been a very, very short time as Prime Minister. He's already shown himself to be incredibly effective in terms of putting some calmness and stability back into the economic situation. Just seen him at COP27. Very, very calm, confident and assured on the world stage. I think the Parliamentary Party and the wider party in the country really rallying around him. I am absolutely, completely comfortable that he is going to be an outstanding Prime Minister.
And Susie, this is about you, this interview. Even though he's the Foreign Secretary, you're the star of this show at the moment. I just want to ask you one more thing. You've been through this incredible journey. You've done it clearly with great resilience. What's, for women out there watching this that are suffering from breast cancer, might be having horrible treatment right now, might be in some of the dark places you're in, what's your message? What do you want to sort of say to them?
Well, use the resources. There are so many resources out there, people to speak to. When I was at a really difficult moment, I rang the acute oncology and they said to me, they were just brilliant. They'd said to me, you know, you're going through so much, but don't worry, things will get better. And just those words just made me, all the worry, and not the worry, just the anxiousness and just dissipated. But the thing to do is it will get, well, hopefully it will get better. Just keep going and be positive and I don't know, I don't know,
Stick
just
with it.
stick with it,
Stick
keep
with
going.
it.
It's not a nice journey, it's a really tough road, but you know, I went right down to the bottom, but I did keep going and I got back up, and now I'm nearly there, nearly there. So just, there's some really tough times, but it should get better.
And I'm so glad for both of you and your boys.
Thank you.
That you did get through the other side. So thank you so much for talking to us today. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, James.
Cheers.
Thank you.
James and Susie, cleverly there in quite a different interview than I'd normally do with a foreign secretary. And if you scan this QR code on screen now, you can watch all of our interviews online and all of the previous episodes of the show. Well, stay with us because coming up, Lord McDonald, instrumental in the downfall of Boris Johnson. We get his thoughts on what it means to be a leader and what he thinks of past PMs. When sexual misconduct allegations were made about the former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, it sent the government into turmoil. Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, said he did not know about the claims. But one man, Simon McDonald, a former civil servant, wrote a letter saying that he did. Lord McDonald has now written a book called Leadership and gives me his verdict on the leaders past and present that he worked with. Lord McDonald, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we're going to talk a bit about this book, which I'm reading, Lessons About a Life in Diplomacy, a book on leadership. And my goodness me, you've worked with quite a few leaders in government. You worked at the Foreign Office for nearly 4 decades. You were the most senior official at the Foreign Office and one of the government's top mandarins for 5 years. You've seen an awful lot. You've written the book about leadership, in which you talk about previous prime ministers and how they handled the job. And this is a real treat for me because typically civil servants never talk to journalists, so I'm feeling very spoiled. But of those prime ministers you served, who was the best and who was the worst leader?
Good question, Beth. And not a simple answer, because they were all good at some things and they were all weak at some things. And they all, or nearly all, look better in the rear view mirror. So as I look back, the first one I was really conscious of was Margaret Thatcher, who was a very difficult, prickly character for the system, but who had a clarity and a sense of purpose and a sense of galvanising the system, which looks to have been one of our most effective prime ministers in 300 years. Then there was John Major, who at the time looked rather beleaguered, but was one of the most methodical men I've ever seen, where he went through the briefs. He knew exactly what he was going to say in any international meeting. Then we had Blair, the best at communicating. You know, in retrospect, some of his biggest policy calls were just wrong, but at the time, the domestic policy, the island policy was right.
Yeah.
Gordon Brown, the best at finance, but quite a difficult communicator. He wore his anxieties on his face.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to lead people through very difficult times, to look as though you're burdened, it makes your task more difficult. Cameron ran a team. You know, he looked the most at ease in the job, and he was, in some ways, the easiest to work for. Theresa May, she was, again, a very methodical person, but with a very difficult job that she didn't really sympathise with. She hadn't been a Brexiteer, so that kind of hobbled her from the start. And then we had Boris Johnson.
OK, one word. OK, you've given me all these different... I could give an adjective for each of those leaders. What would be the one adjective you would use to describe, to summarise Boris Johnson as a leader?
Charismatic.
OK, that's a positive. Negative.
chaotic.
Chaotic, charismatic and chaotic. OK, so we've got Thatcher as difficult but effective. We've got Major as a bit beleaguered. We've got Blair, the communicator, Cameron, the team leader, Brown, good at finance but a bit anxious. And then you've got May, encumbered by a policy she didn't believe in but methodical. We've got Johnson, charismatic but chaotic. Who was the best, who was the worst?
Thatcher was the best and Johnson was the worst.
OK.
Of those we've been talking about.
What about Blair?
Blair, I think, will always be remembered for Northern Ireland, and the Good Friday Agreement was the single most important agreement within these isles in my lifetime, but he will also be remembered for Iraq. And no matter how much he believed in the prospectus at the time, I think looking back, it needs to be reappraised, including by himself.
Let's just talk a bit, if you don't mind, about Boris Johnson, because he features in the book. Now, civil servants live much of their lives behind the scenes. You don't really talk to journalists. It's a kind of code of conduct that you have to be utterly discreet. You're a diplomat. I mean, you work in the shadows. You're never seen in the limelight.
You make me sound like a spy.
Well, did you want to be a spy?
Never.
Did you want to be a spy?
Never, because I'm not discreet enough.
OK, but you did. As a former permanent secretary, you did get involved in the row engulfing Boris Johnson over the Chris Pincher affair. Now, just to quickly remind people, this was the Deputy Chief Whip accused of sexual misconduct back in July. Government ministers publicly saying the Prime Minister was unaware that he faced such allegations in the past before putting him into that sensitive job as Deputy Chief Whip. You heard all of it. What did you make of it? What did you think when you heard it?
I heard it for 5 days. And at the beginning, it seemed to me like a typical number 10 operation where no matter the problem, the instant reaction was denial. Quite adamant, quite aggressive, and quite unbending. But, you know, the pathology is this changes over time, and it did change over the following days, but they never came up with the truth. And there were two key facts which I thought needed to be in the public domain and which were still not in the public domain the following Tuesday. And they were, had there been allegations before? Had they been investigated? And what was the outcome? And second, did the Prime Minister know? And the answers to these two questions were yes and yes.
Because this has happened at the Foreign Office?
Yes.
A few years before.
Chris Pincher was a junior minister. A very similar allegation was made by members of the Foreign Office. They came to me personally because it was very sensitive and very unusual. Because it was sensitive and unusual, it was also very memorable. So I remembered each of the steps. I kept the Cabinet Office at the highest level informed, and they kept me informed about what they were doing, including with the Prime Minister.
So the then Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, was he then Foreign Secretary?
He was Prime Minister.
He was Prime Minister and he was told?
Yes.
And Simon, did you know the impact it would have? Because it had big impact, which we'll get to. Did you appreciate at the time when you made the intervention, this is going to be big?
Frankly, no.
You didn't? OK.
The last words I said to my wife before I went to bed, because my wife made me sleep on it. I'd written the letter on the Monday evening. She made me sleep on it. And as we were going to sleep, I said, do you think anybody will notice?
Well, they did notice, and his cabinet notes, which I'll come to. But you then found yourself a victim of quite a vicious briefing war. This is from the Daily Telegraph on the 5th of July, the day that you released this letter saying that it's not true what Number 10 is saying about what the PM did and didn't know. This is a former minister. They never saw eye to eye. Simon never made a secret of the fact he was a strong Remainer, and he has always had big issues with Brexit. So now they're playing the man, not the ball. There was a sense that this was some sort of revenge on your part, or you had issues with Boris Johnson, the leading Brexiteer. What would you say to those allegations? How did that feel for you? Was it really unpleasant?
was unpleasant, but much less unpleasant than what the victims of the various Pincher scandals had undergone. And it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong. I mean, I have already said I was a Remainer, and I made that plain to the then Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister. But what was more important was doing the job for the government, and I believe I did that, and the Foreign Office did that.
But Simon, was there any extent to which you were opposed to his political project and you did want to get rid of him?
No, absolutely not. I hope I'm smiling, because the idea that civil servants sit around and plot who should be in charge is just not true.
But you didn't like... I mean, the book drips with animosity, I have to say, and you didn't like the guy, right? You didn't think he was up to the job. That's fair, isn't it?
They're two different points, Beth. On a personal level, Boris Johnson was always charming to deal with. He was humorous, he was kind, he was the person, the Foreign Secretary I worked with, who had most time for the people in his office, including in his outer office. And this is a real mark of a character. But what you need to be an effective Prime Minister is different. Being Prime Minister is one of the toughest jobs in the world. And one of the surprises to me is that in modern British politics, so many people think they are qualified to pitch for this most difficult and most examining of jobs.
And he wasn't, in your view, qualified?
Other people will judge, but I think as he contemplates his 3 years as Prime Minister, he probably would concede that he did not achieve what he hoped.
But so you said, I mean, extremely charismatic, and he genuinely is a charismatic leader who can reach parts of the electorate, you know, that other Conservatives can't reach, other politicians can't reach. You said he was chaotic. What other traits did you see in him that made you think, this is a really hard job and you're not up to it? So chaotic, what else?
The chaotic was he liked to have multiple opinions swirling around him. And the people proposing those ideas never really knew whose was in the lead and where the decision would be. And sometimes the decision wasn't clear, and sometimes the decision was reversed. So there was too much swirl. And in the end, the system responds to clearer direction.
But your intervention was decisive. You are the civil servant that brought down a Prime Minister. I mean, the resignation started that night from his cabinet. You are.
I'm a footnote. My history teacher, who features in the book, told me the difference between the occasion of events and the causes of events.
I read that.
And the causes that brought down Boris Johnson had been laid long before my tweet.
OK, so you weren't the cause. That you weren't the cause. You were the occasion. I read that in the book, but you were still the trigger.
OK.
You accept that?
I accept that mine was the final straw that made it onto the Johnsons' camel's back first.
But you did open the floodgate, because it was after your letter, and I remember listening to the radio that morning and thinking, blimey, this is... Because you don't intervene, and that you did, it did trigger a series of events in which both Sajid Javid and then Rishi Sunak resigned from cabinet that night, then dozens more resignations. By Wednesday night, the Prime Minister insisting he was going to stay. Thursday morning, he had no option but to go.
But Beth, all I did was insist on two facts to be acknowledged. And the fact that they had not been acknowledged for the previous 5 days turned out to be important.
But you then tweeted out, you tweeted out a picture of Westminster at sunset, and you said it had been... And you mention it in the book, it's been a good day. There we go. It was a good day. It did make it sound like a personal... animus a bit, that you had your reasons. He pushed you out of the Foreign Office. He chose to merge the departments. I mean, it was pretty brutal the way you got shoved out after a very long and successful career.
I supported the merger very, very strongly. Now, Beth, as I look at that tweet and think about all the reactions, that is something I would do differently.
OK.
But at the time, I was reacting to the negative briefing.
Right,
You know,
okay.
the whole system, everything around the Prime Minister had become so personal and disagreeable that in that moment, with that rather lovely view, it did feel like it was a good day.
So the personal briefings did get you a bit, and you did this. Did you sort of wish you hadn't done this now?
Well,
you said you'd do it differently.
I would, because I didn't want it to be personal. It wasn't personal. I was trying to establish important facts. And the fact that that tweet obscures that means that I misfired.
But it also shows that you were hurt.
Hurt and human, yeah.
Yeah, hurt and human, and had horrible briefings against you. Before we move on, though, what were you thinking when it looked like Boris Johnson was potentially going to return as Prime Minister over that weekend, where it looked like he was going to make another tilt at the job? Were you alarmed by that?
Yes. It just seemed incredible to me that people who had lived through all of 2022, who had lived through that dramatic week in July, who had precipitated Boris Johnson's downfall, so the Parliamentary Conservative Party, would just 3 or 4 months later forget all the negative side and think, you know, we'll give him a second chance. And the thing that most puzzled me was the line that Boris Johnson has learned his lesson. Whereas one thing I think Boris Johnson has always been clear and consistent about is that he is who he is. You take him as he is, and he does not and will not change. So I was very surprised that more than 100 Conservative MPs had forgotten that.
But should there ever be a way back for him, or you think not?
Of course there can be. Of course he can have another tilt. I quote Enoch Powell and others that there are no second acts in British politics. So it would be a surprise, but he has that option. It would take a lot of hard work, and he would have to put other priorities on hold. So he wouldn't be able to devote so much time to the speaker circuit in the USA. He'd have to devote a lot of time to his constituency and to Parliament.
And now we have, or we had, Liz Truss. I mean, you say in the book that you'd hoped that civility, honesty and personal responsibility would come with the arrival of a new Prime Minister. What did you make of Liz Truss's short premiership? What was your view of her? You'd worked with her before as well, hadn't you?
Only at one remove. And our conversation about good Prime Ministers ended too soon, or bad Prime Ministers. I think if the list includes Liz Truss, well, then she was a worse Prime Minister than Boris Johnson, because she started and made 2 immediate, irrevocable mistakes. The first was excluding from her government anybody who had not supported her to the hilt. And the second was running a budget, a mini-budget, that was ideologically driven, and before launching that budget, taking care that she could not hear, would not receive any contrary advice.
Boris Johnson also did that, by the way. He put into cabinet, he created a cabinet around him that were full of his backers and not his detractors.
True, but he had led the party to its biggest election victory since Margaret Thatcher. Liz Truss had not.
One thing she did do, though, was she did secure the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Now, did she ride on the success of others' hard work, successive or her predecessors, or was she genuinely a politician that could get things done?
She pays tribute to the work of her predecessors. I mean, Jeremy Hunt in particular devoted himself to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case. So it was the culmination of a lot of people's hard work, and Liz Truss was there when the moment came.
Just quickly, before I move on, all of this talk in the run-up to this moment where Liz Truss became Prime Minister, they talked about Treasury orthodoxy. Did you see that as code for disregarding the civil service order? Did you see it as a sort of sign of attack on Whitehall?
Well, it was certainly an attack on the Treasury. It was an attack on constraints. It was an attack on things that Liz Truss and her team believed had been holding back the United Kingdom. But they learned very quickly that their analysis was not a complete analysis.
But was there anything more the civil service could have done to avert the crisis? You know, like, does the civil service take some responsibility, or are you merely executors of your political masters, if you like?
The deal is civil servants advise and ministers decide. So all the decisions of Liz Truss's government were hers and her ministers.
Well, I want to just... We've part Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Quickly, Rishi Sunak, where would you put him in your leadership league table?
Again,
unproven.
One of the methodical ones, as you say, unproven, but promising raw material, very promising.
Promising, OK.
So I feel awkward as a civil servant assessing
it's my favourite thing. Let's just do it all day.
There we go.
Another critical foreign policy issue of your time was the Iraq War. And you come pretty close in this book saying that Tony Blair lied. You talk about that moment where, in the Chilcot inquiry, that letter's uncovered, where he says to President Bush, "I will be with you whatever." Do you think he lied?
No. I think that the intelligence picture comprehensively misled him.
And you're quite critical of that in the book.
I'm sure he, at every step during the run-up and through the conflict, he believed what he was saying because there was documentary evidence, intelligence to support it.
But Simon, you also talk in the book about leaders, the best leaders, being able to admit their mistakes. With the reference to Blair's insistence that the Iraq War was not a disaster, do you think he struggles to admit his mistakes even now, even as time has passed?
Yes.
You do?
I think there's still time for him to look again. But even all these years later, he, I believe, defends what he did further than the facts support.
You think that that's poor leadership?
An aspect, but he did many other things besides.
What is it about him? Is it arrogant? Is it arrogance? Is it self-belief? Is it doesn't want to admit it to himself?
It's a human thing. The decisions that are biggest in our lives, we are most attached to. If it turns out they were wrong decisions, it's very, very difficult as a human being to admit it.
And if you indulge me, I've gone massively over time, as ever, but this is such a fascinating conversation. I just want to finish on Putin. I find this section in the book fascinating when you talk about Tony Blair's final G8 summit. You're nodding, you'll know the bit I'm referring to. It's 2007, and he meets Putin, and Putin signals in this conversation a reassertion of Russian influence and aggression and dissatisfaction with the post-Cold War setup and the way in which he perceives Russia has been treated, or rather sort of mistreated, by the West. And those leaders 15 years ago, do you think that they ever understood the significance of that moment, or did they ever take him seriously?
They took him seriously, but they misread the signals from 2007, which started in a big speech in Munich at the Security Conference in February. But then, as the year went on, he was saying this more and more clearly. And the following year, he invaded Georgia. And ever since then, we have seen a ramping up of Russian operations externally. Crimea in 2014 was enormously important, but kind of downplayed. So when we look back, we in the West must see that we contributed to him overreaching in February 2022.
Is that one of your biggest regrets? When you look back on your time in the Foreign Office, is that one of your biggest regrets, that they've kind of perhaps leaders, the establishment, didn't see what was coming, or was it seen but for other political reasons wasn't acted upon?
We did some very good things on Russia policy. I think after the Skripal poisoning, the British system, with Boris Johnson as the Foreign Secretary, led the world's reaction. Never before had 30 countries coordinated the expulsion of spies. But when you measure what we were doing against the challenge that we now see, well, then clearly we fell short. But Beth, I think this applies in other areas of policy. Right now, I think we're falling short in our climate response. You know, it's something we talk about, we know is important. COP27 is happening right now. But I suspect in 10, 20 years, when we look back, we'll think, OK, we were doing some stuff, but we really weren't doing enough.
Is that one area, though, where you think Boris Johnson can take some credit, that he did try and galvanise momentum on climate?
Yeah, COP26 was the biggest such conference since the Paris conference in 2016, or 2015. So, yes, he did show leadership, and it was, you know, the awful circumstances of the end of the COVID that meant that it was smaller and less impactful than he wanted.
And so my final question to you, do you think that a cornered Putin might reach for tactical nuclear weapons?
I understand his rationale in spooking us. I do not believe it works for Russia actually to deploy such weapons. They would lose all their support, starting with, most important, China. So I think when Putin is looking at an actual decision, he will decide not to use nuclear weapons.
What adjective would you use to describe Putin as a leader?
Cold, calculating, determined, scary.
Dangerous?
Dangerous, for sure.
OK. Well, look, thank you so much, Simon McDonald, Lord McDonald, for coming in to talk about your book. And it was really enjoyable to talk to you. Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Simon McDonald there. And we should say the former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, denies all allegations of sexual misconduct. Well, that's it for tonight's show. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Lord McDonald and James and Susie Cleverly. And if you scan that QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast. A new episode is available each week, and I take a look at the highlights of the interviews, and we talk a bit of politics too. That's on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and I hope to see you next time.